attention. His bravado faltered, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He stammered, I don't need advice from some passerby. You'd best move along." Mike took a step closer, his towering presence casting a long shadow over the officer. His voice was calm but carried an undeniable authority. "You're not enforcing the law right now, you're abusing it. I suggest you think very carefully about your next move." The woman, still seated on the steps, watched in awe as the scene unfolded. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere as Mike's composed yet commanding demeanor began to dismantle the officer's aggression. The officer hesitated, glancing nervously between the woman and Mike. His bluster was gone, replaced by visible discomfort. With a muttered excuse, he stepped back, his authority crumbling under the weight of the moment. "Fine, just stay out of trouble," he barked, before turning abruptly and walking away. Mike exhaled slowly, his broad shoulders relaxing. He turned to the woman, offering her a reassuring smile. "Are you all right?" The woman nodded, her voice steady despite the ordeal. "I am now. Thank you." Mike extended a hand to help her to her feet. "No one deserves to be treated like that. Ever." She took his hand, her gratitude evident in her eyes. "You didn't have to step in. But you did. That means more than I can say." Mike shrugged, his humility shining through. Sometimes doing the right thing is the only option. As they walked away together, the quiet streets of Greenwood seemed a little brighter, the air lighter. For Mike, it wasn't just about confronting an unjust situation. It was a reminder of the strength found in unity and the courage to stand up for what's right. Down the hall that opened off the stairs, they heard the door open. The air around them grew tense, the weight of Mike's words hanging heavily in the silence. Walker faltered, his bravado cracking under the unwavering force of Mike's presence. His partner shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Walker as if reconsidering their next move. The woman, still seated on the steps, held her breath, her eyes darting between the officers and Mike. She could feel the shift in power, the balance tipping in her favor. Walker finally took a step back, his smirk gone. His voice, though still gruff, carried an edge of resignation. "This isn't over," he muttered, turning on his heel and heading toward the patrol car. His partner hesitated for a moment before following, casting one last wary glance at Mike. As the car doors slammed shut and the engine roared to life, the oppressive atmosphere began to lift. Mike stood his ground, watching the vehicle disappear down the street, ensuring they were truly gone before relaxing. He turned to the woman, his expression softening. "You're safe now," he said, offering his hand to help her stand. She took it, her grip firm, despite the lingering tremble in her hands. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "If you hadn't been here—" Mike shook his head, his voice calm but resolute. "You don't have to thank me. No one should face this kind of treatment. Just know there are people who will stand with you." The woman nodded, a small but genuine smile breaking through her fear. "You've done more than stand with me. You gave me hope." Mike smiled back, a quiet but powerful affirmation of the moment. As they parted ways, the golden light of the setting sun bathed the street, and the echoes of what had transpired seemed to fade into the warmth of a new beginning. Said, her voice measured but resolute, and his partner need to be held accountable. What they did wasn't just unprofessional, it was unlawful. This isn't just about you, Vivian. It's about preventing this kind of abuse from happening to anyone else. Vivian hesitated, her fingers nervously interlocking. "But won't this become a drawn-out battle? I'm not sure I'm ready for the spotlight or the backlash." Mike leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "You've fought harder battles to get where you are. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about standing up for everyone who can't fight back. And you're not alone in this. Sandra and I will be with you every step of the way." Sandra nodded, her expression softening but still determined. "We have the video evidence and witnesses who are willing to testify. This isn't an uphill battle. We have a strong case. The law is on your side, Vivian, and we'll make sure it works for you." Vivian looked at both of them, the weight of her decision evident in her eyes. After a moment, she straightened her posture and nodded. "All right. Let's do this." Sandra immediately got to work, instructing her team to compile the videos, gather statements from the witnesses, and prepare the necessary legal documents. Meanwhile, Mike and Vivian began reaching out to community organizations and media outlets to shed light on the broader issue of systemic abuse of power. The story quickly gained traction, sparking widespread outrage and calls for reform. Walker and his partner were placed under investigation, their actions condemned by both the public and their own department. The incident became a rallying cry for accountability and justice. Throughout it all, Vivian found strength not only in her supporters but also in herself. She realized that her voice, amplified by courage and conviction, had the power to drive change. And with Mike and Sandra by her side, she embraced the fight, knowing they were paving the way for a fairer, more just future. It threw together. This isn't just your fight. It's ours, and it's for everyone who's ever been silenced. Sandra leaned forward, her tone resolute. "The next steps are critical. We'll compile all the evidence, prepare for any counterattacks on our credibility, and ensure that Grant's testimony is solid. But we need to be vigilant. They'll try to discredit us at every turn." Vivian nodded, her eyes steady and determined. "Let them try. The truth is on our side, and I'm ready for whatever comes." Mike glanced at Sandra, then back at Vivian. "We'll make noise where it matters most. Public pressure and media coverage will keep the spotlight on them. They can't bury this story now." In the days that followed, the lawsuit gained momentum. Sandra's legal team worked tirelessly, unearthing additional evidence and rallying support from other victims who had faced similar injustices. Meanwhile, Mike's public advocacy amplified the case, drawing attention from activists, celebrities, and community leaders. Walker and his colleagues tried to push back, but their efforts only revealed the extent of their wrongdoing. With every passing day, more people came forward with stories of abuse, turning the case into a watershed moment for addressing systemic corruption. Vivian's resolve grew stronger with each step of the process. What began as a deeply personal encounter had evolved into a collective battle for justice. She realized that by standing up, she had inspired others to do the same. As the legal proceedings loomed closer, the team knew the fight was far from over. Yet the growing wave of support, combined with their unwavering determination, made it clear they wouldn't stop until the system changed and justice prevailed. Image and questioning her credibility. They dug into her past, twisting facts to tarnish her reputation. Photos were circulated, accompanied by misleading narratives intended to distract from the core issue. Vivian read the headlines with a mix of frustration and determination. She knew this would happen, but the sting of such tactics was still difficult to bear. Mike noticed her quiet moment of reflection and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Let them throw their punches," he said, his voice steady. "You've taken harder hits before, and you've stood back up every time. This is no different." Sandra, meanwhile, was unfazed. She had anticipated this counterattack and had already prepared a response. She organized interviews with reporters she trusted, ensuring Vivian's story was told truthfully and with dignity. "We focus on the facts," Sandra said during a strategy meeting. "Let them smear her character. It only shows how desperate they are. Our case is built on evidence and testimony, and that's what will prevail." Public support began to grow as more people saw through the smear campaign. Individuals who had suffered similar injustices started sharing their own stories online, creating a powerful wave of solidarity. The narrative shifted back to the core issue of systemic abuse, bolstered by the courage of those who refused to be silenced. As the lawsuit moved closer to court, the pressure intensified. Walker's legal team attempted to discredit Officer Grant, calling his motives into question and casting doubt on his testimony. But Grant remained steadfast, his resolve bolstered by the knowledge that his truth could no longer be suppressed. During a private moment, Vivian looked at Mike and Sandra, her voice quiet but resolute. "Whatever happens, I'm grateful for both of you. This fight is bigger than any of us, and I couldn't have done it alone." Mike smiled, his expression filled with pride. "We're not done yet, but we're making progress. Together, we're unstoppable." Sandra nodded. "They're afraid, and that's why they're fighting so hard. But fear doesn't win in the face of truth and determination." As the team prepared for the courtroom battle ahead, they knew the road would remain difficult, but with each step they grew more certain that they were part of something much larger. A fight for justice, equality, and the power of standing united against corruption. Exploit and intimidate. Today, we present evidence and testimonies to prove that Bryce Walker's actions are not isolated, but part of a disturbing pattern that has caused irreparable harm to many, including my client, Miss Vivian Sinclair. Sandra's words were deliberate and compelling, immediately capturing the attention of everyone in the room. The opening statements from Walker's defense attorney, however, attempted to paint a different picture. They claimed that Vivian was exaggerating the events for personal gain, trying to manipulate public sympathy. The defense also hinted at Vivian's past, suggesting that her motivations were not entirely pure. When Vivian took the stand, she spoke with calm precision. She recounted every detail of her encounter with Walker, from the unjust confrontation on Greenwood Street to the harassment at the police station. Her voice wavered at moments, but she never lost her composure. "All I wanted," Vivian said, addressing the jury directly, "was to sit peacefully in a public space, just like anyone else. But instead I was treated as if my mere presence was a crime. I am not standing here today to seek pity or revenge. I am here because this shouldn't happen to anyone." Mike Tyson was called as a key witness, and his testimony was as impactful as his presence. He described how he intervened to protect Vivian and how Walker's hostility escalated even in the face of public scrutiny. "I've faced many opponents in my life," Mike said, his voice firm. "But what I saw that day wasn't just intimidation. It was a blatant abuse of power." Officer Grant's testimony was another turning point in the case. He detailed Walker's history of misconduct, providing examples of harassment, intimidation, and unethical behavior that had been swept under the rug. Grant's decision to come forward, despite the risks, underscored the gravity of the accusations. The The prosecution presented evidence, including video recordings from bystanders that showed Walker's aggressive behavior. Testimonies from other victims of Walker added further weight to the case, painting a clear picture of a man who had repeatedly abused his authority. As the trial progressed, the defense struggled to counter the mounting evidence. They attempted to discredit Officer Grant, questioning his motives, but Grant stood firm. "I stayed silent for too long," he said, "but I've come forward now because the truth matters more than my comfort." Outside the courthouse, public support for Vivian and the case against Walker continued to grow. Social media buzzed with updates, and hashtags like "Justice for Vivian" and "Stop Police Abuse" trended worldwide. Activists and community leaders rallied around the case, amplifying its significance as a symbol of resistance against systemic abuse. On the final day of the trial, Sandra delivered a closing argument that left a lasting impact. "This case," she said, her voice steady but filled with passion, "is not just about one woman's fight. It's about holding accountable those who abuse the power entrusted to them. It's about ensuring that no one, regardless of their background or status, feels unsafe or unworthy in their own community." Today, we ask for justice, not just for Vivian Sinclair, but for every voice that has been silenced. The jury deliberated for hours, and the courtroom was filled with tension as everyone awaited the verdict. Finally, the jury returned, and the foreperson stood to read the decision. Bryce Walker was found guilty of abuse of power and misconduct. The courtroom erupted in a mix of applause and relieved sighs. Walker's face, once defiant, now showed traces of defeat as he realized the consequences of his actions. As Vivian left the courthouse, the crowd outside cheered her on. Mike walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. Sandra followed, her expression reflecting both satisfaction and the resolve to continue the fight for justice. In the days that followed, the case had ripple effects beyond the courtroom. The revelations sparked calls for systemic reform, and investigations into police misconduct were launched in multiple precincts. Vivian, once a private individual, became a symbol of resilience and courage, inspiring others to speak out against injustice. For Mike, Vivian, and Sandra, the victory was significant, but they knew the fight was far from over. The case was a step forward. A powerful reminder that change is possible when people come together with courage and determination. In the quiet moments after the trial, Vivian reflected on how far they had come. She turned to Mike and Sandra, gratitude shining in her eyes. "We did it," she said softly. "Not just for me, but for everyone who needed this victory." Mike nodded, a rare smile crossing his face. "We're not done yet," he said, "but this is a good start." Sandra added, her tone both serious and hopeful, "And it's proof that when we stand together we can take on even the toughest battles." "That no one is above accountability," Vivian began, her voice steady despite the wave of emotions washing over her. "This isn't just a victory for me. It's a victory for everyone who has ever been silenced, mistreated, or made to feel powerless. This is proof that standing up, no matter how daunting, can bring change." Mike stood behind her, his towering presence a symbol of unwavering support. Sandra, standing to Vivian's right, nodded slightly, her usual composure softened by a faint smile of satisfaction. The media frenzy was intense, with reporters firing questions one after the other. Vivian answered each with the same calm determination that had carried her through the trial. When asked about her next steps, she replied, "This case is a starting point, not an end. We've exposed one corrupt officer, but there's a larger system that allowed his behavior to persist. We must address that too." As the crowd applauded her words, Vivian glanced at Sandra and Mike, silently thanking them for their support. She knew this battle had been a team effort, and their combined strength had been instrumental in achieving justice. In the following days, the case became a national topic, sparking debates about police accountability and systemic reform. Calls for change echoed across social media, community forums, and even government offices. Investigations were launched into Walker's precinct, uncovering further misconduct and leading to suspensions and resignations. Vivian, once a private figure, now found herself in the spotlight as an advocate for justice. Despite the overwhelming attention, she remained focused, using her platform to amplify the voices of others who had suffered similar injustices. Mike, true to his word, continued to stand by her side. He participated in community meetings and spoke at rallies, urging people to support systemic reforms. "This isn't just about fixing one broken part," he said during a televised interview. "It's about ensuring the whole system works for everyone, not just a select few." Sandra, meanwhile, took on additional cases, inspired by the momentum generated by Vivian's victory. She became a prominent figure in the fight against institutional abuse, her name synonymous with tenacity and integrity in the legal field. Despite the progress, there were challenges. Critics attempted to downplay the case's significance, arguing that it was an isolated incident rather than a reflection of systemic issues. Some even tried to discredit Vivian by digging into her past, but each attack only seemed to strengthen her resolve. Vivian addressed the criticisms directly during an interview. "My past doesn't diminish the truth of what happened," she said firmly. "If anything, it underscores why this fight matters, because everyone, regardless of their background, deserves justice." Her words resonated widely, turning the tide of public opinion even further in her favor. People began sharing their own stories of injustice, creating a groundswell of support for broader reforms. Months later, standing in a packed auditorium at a community event, Vivian reflected on how far they had come. She spoke passionately about the need for continued vigilance and collective action. "Justice isn't a destination," she told the crowd. "It's a journey we must all commit to every single day." The applause that followed was deafening, but Vivian's focus remained clear. She wasn't celebrating a personal victory. She was rallying others to join the fight. After the event, as she stepped outside into the crisp evening air, Mike and Sandra were waiting. Mike gave her a proud nod, while Sandra handed her a folder filled with details of another case needing their attention. Vivian smiled, a quiet determination lighting her face. "Let's get to work," she said. Together they walked forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing they had the strength and support to make a difference. Calmly but firmly, this is not an attack on honorable officers who serve with integrity. It is a demand for accountability from those who tarnish the badge by abusing their power. If protecting justice and fairness is controversial, then so be it. Her words resonated deeply, sparking even more public support. Social media platforms were flooded with hashtags like Justice for All and Accountability Now. Stories began emerging from people across the nation, sharing their experiences with systemic abuse, creating a powerful collective voice for change. Mike Tyson became increasingly active, using his platform to call out those trying to silence the movement. In one memorable interview, he stated, "They think attacking Vivian will scare us into giving up, but they're wrong. This isn't about one person. This is about standing up for everyone who's ever been wronged and making sure it doesn't happen again. The campaign began hosting rallies in cities nationwide, drawing tens of thousands of people. At each rally, Vivian stood on the stage, delivering speeches that inspired and united. Her voice, both strong and empathetic, became a beacon of hope for many. Sandra, meanwhile, worked tirelessly behind the scenes, coordinating legal efforts and pushing for policy reforms. She spearheaded a coalition of legal experts who drafted proposals for systemic changes, including mandatory body cameras for officers, independent oversight boards, and stricter accountability measures for misconduct. Despite the momentum, challenges persisted. Opponents filed lawsuits to halt the campaign, alleging it incited unrest. Politicians sympathetic to the status quo attempted to discredit the movement. Vivian faced increasing scrutiny, with tabloids publishing sensationalized stories about her personal life. In a particularly heated press conference, a reporter asked, "Mr. Sinclair, how do you respond to accusations that you're doing all this for personal gain?" Vivian paused, her gaze steady. If standing up against injustice and demanding accountability is considered selfish, then I accept that accusation. But let me be clear, this is not about me. It's about a broken system that needs to be fixed for everyone. Her authenticity silenced critics and further galvanized her supporters. As the months passed, tangible progress began to emerge. A statewide audit of police misconduct cases was launched, uncovering patterns of abuse similar to those in Walker's case. Several officers faced disciplinary actions, and some precincts were restructured. In a historic move, Vivian and Sandra were invited to testify before a congressional hearing on police reform. Sandra presented a well-prepared case, citing data and legal precedents, while Vivian shared her personal story, connecting the systemic issues to real human suffering. Reform isn't optional, Vivian concluded in her testimony. It's necessary for the survival of our shared values of justice and equality. Her words were met with a standing ovation from many in attendance, and her testimony became a turning point in the fight for reform. Amid the victories, Vivian remained grounded. She continued meeting with survivors of abuse, listening to their stories and providing support. She often reminded those around her, "This movement isn't about me being a hero. It's about all of us working together to create lasting change." Mike and Sandra stood by her side every step of the way. The bond they had formed through their shared struggle became unbreakable, and their partnership symbolized the power of unity. One evening, as the three of them walked through a park after a successful rally, Vivian looked at her friends. "This isn't what I imagined my life would be," she said softly, "but it feels like everything I've been through led me here." Mike smiled, his deep voice warm. "Sometimes life throws you into the fight you were born to lead." Sandra nodded, her usual seriousness tempered with a rare moment of warmth, and together, "We're making a difference." As they walked on, the city lights shining around them, they knew the road ahead would still be challenging. But they also knew they had the strength, determination, and support to keep moving forward, step by step, toward a future where justice truly was for all. "Not why I started this, Mike. I didn't set out to be a phenomenon or a headline. I just wanted justice for myself and for those who've been silenced for too long." Mike smiled, opening the pizza box. "That's exactly why you've become a phenomenon. You're real. People see that. They trust you because you're not doing this for fame. You're doing it because it's right." As they ate, they reflected on how far they had come. "Do you ever think about how this all started?" Mike asked, leaning back in his chair. Vivian nodded, her expression thoughtful. "All the time. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it also feels like it happened just yesterday. I never imagined that standing up for myself that day would lead to all this." Meanwhile, Sandra was tirelessly coordinating with various organizations to ensure the reforms were implemented effectively. She had become a central figure in the legal battle for systemic change, drafting legislation proposals and working closely with lawmakers to make the changes permanent. The campaign continued to gain momentum, with rallies, workshops, and town hall meetings becoming regular events. Vivian's speeches resonated deeply with people, especially when she shared stories of others who had suffered under a broken system. She often said, "This isn't just my fight, it's our fight." Every voice matters in the pursuit of justice. Criticism, however, persisted. Detractors claimed the movement was overstepping its bounds, accusing it of creating division rather than unity. Some news outlets attempted to paint Vivian as an agitator rather than an advocate. In response to these attacks, Vivian remained composed. During a nationally televised debate, she said, "Division comes from injustice, not from those who expose it. Unity is built on accountability and fairness, not on ignoring the pain of the oppressed." Her eloquence and authenticity silenced many critics and bolstered her supporters' resolve. Over time, the reforms began to yield visible results. The Independent Oversight Committee became operational, handling complaints with transparency and impartiality. Community policing initiatives were introduced, fostering trust between law enforcement and the public. Officers underwent retraining programs, focusing on de-escalation and respect for human rights. One day, Sandra shared a report with Vivian and Mike detailing the progress made since the movement began. "This is incredible," Vivian said, her voice tinged with both pride and humility. "But there's still so much more to do." Mike grinned. "That's why we're here. This isn't just about fixing what's broken, it's about building something better." As the movement reached its first anniversary, a massive rally was held in the city where it all began. Thousands of people gathered, holding signs that read, "Justice for All" and "Power with Accountability." Vivian stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd, her heart swelling with emotion. In her speech she said, "1 year ago, I was just one voice speaking out against injustice. Today, we are a chorus demanding change. This journey has shown me that courage is contagious and that when we stand together, we can achieve the impossible." The crowd erupted in cheers, their collective energy a testament to the power of unity and determination. Later that evening, as Vivian, Mike, and Sandra sat together in a quiet corner of the rally venue, they reflected on their journey. "It's amazing how far we've come," Sandra said, her voice filled with gratitude. Vivian nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "It is, but we're not done yet. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something much bigger." Mike raised his glass of fruit juice in a toast, "To justice, perseverance, and the fight that never ends." They clinked glasses, their bond stronger than ever, their resolve unshaken. Outside, the city buzzed with life, a reminder that the world was watching, waiting, and ready for the next chapter in their story. Vivian stared at the stack of papers on the table, her mind racing with the weight of everything that had transpired. "It's strange," she said softly. "I never thought my story would go this far. But this isn't my success alone, Mike. You and Sandra have always been by my side." Mike shrugged, grabbing a slice of pizza, his usual nonchalant demeanor intact. Don't be so modest, Vivian. You've led the way, but I agree with you. It's just the beginning. As he spoke, Sandra walked in carrying a thick stack of documents, her expression as focused as ever. I have good news, she said, sitting down across from Vivian. We've convinced the federal government to consider making these reforms national policy. It won't just be in one city, it will apply to all police departments across the country, enforcing new transparency and accountability regulations. Vivian looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Really? This could change everything. Sandra smiled, nodding. Yes, but we need to keep the pressure on, otherwise everything we've worked for could be forgotten. In the following weeks, Vivienne continued to speak out on national platforms. She appeared at numerous forums, emphasizing the importance of transparency and accountability within the legal system. Her words were powerful, and her call for action was impossible to ignore. Mike, with his far-reaching influence, stood by her side, consistently rallying for justice. At a major university, he gave a speech that resonated with everyone in the audience. Justice isn't a luxury, he declared. It's a basic right for everyone, but this right won't exist if we don't fight to protect it. Meanwhile, Sandra continued working tirelessly behind the scenes. She pursued new lawsuits, protected other victims, and used her legal expertise to ensure the movement's momentum remained strong. A year after the trial, Vivian found herself standing on the stage of an international human rights conference. Behind her, large banners read, "Justice for All, the journey continues." As she looked down at the audience, which included activists, leaders, and ordinary citizens, she felt a deep sense of purpose. "We've achieved so much," she began, her voice strong and unwavering, "but the road ahead is still long. Justice isn't something you achieve once and forget about. It's an ongoing journey that requires courage, perseverance, and the unity of all of us. I hope that each person here will continue to fight, not just for themselves but for those who cannot speak up." The entire auditorium rose to their feet in applause, a wave of support and admiration filling the room. Sandra and Mike, sitting in the front row, exchanged looks of pride. They knew this moment was not just a personal victory for Vivian, but a victory for everyone who longed for fairness and equality. As Vivian stepped off the stage, a young girl approached her, her eyes wide with admiration. "Miss Sinclair, your story changed my life. I want to become a lawyer so I can help vulnerable people just like you have." Vivian smiled warmly, placing her hand on the girl's shoulder. "You have the strength within you. Never stop believing in justice. You can change the world." That night, the three of them sat together in a small restaurant on a quiet street corner, reflecting on the journey they had taken. Mike, always with his mischievous grin, raised his glass of juice. "We've done something extraordinary, but I bet Vivian isn't satisfied yet, right?" Vivian laughed, her eyes sparkling. "No, I still have a lot to do, but at least I know we've proven one thing. Justice isn't out of reach. If we're brave enough to stand up, it can become a reality." Outside, the city lights twinkled, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of justice always existed. The journey they had started was far from over, but they had accomplished so much, and the future looked brighter than ever. The story of Vivian Sinclair, Mike Tyson, and Sandra Mills is not just a battle against injustice. It is a reminder that courage, unity, and belief in justice can transform an entire system. Through their struggles, they prove that even in the face of oppression, Everyone has the ability to stand up for their values and contribute to building a fairer society. Vivian did not let herself be stifled by fear or injustice. She took her pain and turned it into motivation, and with the support of her loyal companions, Mike and Sandra, she created a movement for reform that reached millions of hearts. Their story teaches us that no matter where we are or what circumstances we face, if we stand together, nothing is impossible. Vivian's journey calls on each of us to speak up for those who cannot fight for themselves, to defend the values we believe in, and to never let fear prevent us from standing on the side of what is right. Because justice is not a privilege, it is the right of everyone. If this story has inspired you, continue spreading these powerful messages. Together, we can build a better world where justice, kindness, and hope always exist.